So, what if I told you around 2,000 years ago, there was this fire festival that a community would celebrate, and they would gather at dusk and extinguish all their fires in their village? We're talking every fireplace, every stove, every lamp, every hearth. And they would drive their livestock in between two enormous bonfires and just hope and pray that nothing would go wrong. And tonight we're going to talk about why. So grab yourself a drink, pour something, and let's dive in. So here's the thing. May 1st just isn't like any normal day. So to the ancient Celts, it's Beltane, which is, or Beltane. My pronunciation might be incorrect. Excuse me, I am new at this. But anyway, it's one of the oldest festivals in the Celtic calendar. And it also happens this year, actually, is really cool because it happens on the night of a full moon. And that full moon also happens to be in Scorpio. So we have ancient Celtic fire magic and a super intense lunar cosmic event. And it's all happening on the same Friday. So we have a lot to talk about. May 1st marks the beginning of summer in the Celtic calendar. And I think it's fair to say that it marks the beginning of summer for us in the modern world too. It's one of the 4 major Gaelic festivals, but we're going to focus on Beltane, which is the beginning of summer. And we don't really know where the name Beltane came from. Scholars still debate that either it comes from the Old Irish word Beltane, or it's linked to the deity Bel, who is the goddess of fire. And Beltane in Old Irish possibly means bright fire. But again, scholars really don't know what's happening. So basically, we don't know where the name Beltane came from. But it's one of the two, right? What it actually was is, I talked about moving livestock around. The Celts moved their livestock to summer pastures. That's the most simplest form I could put it. And this was a high stakes moment because everything that they've planned for is now at stake in the next 3 months. So cattle was driven between 2 massive bonfires for purification and protection. And think of it this way. You do the same thing if you sage your house. You light your sage bundle and you go around your house and with the sage smoke. And what's that for? It's for purification and protection. So they thought the smoke from the bonfires would do the same thing for their livestock and for their agriculture. So the fires were called Tenjin. So again, pronunciation, don't come at me. But it basically means need fire or forced fire. Made by friction, not a spark. So instead of taking a barbecue lighter, the ritual was they were supposed to use like actual sticks to make these huge bonfires. And it had to be lit communally. It was often started and respected by like high-ranking community members. And it was like this whole thing. The community elders would come out, they would start a bonfire, they'd let the cows out, this whole thing. But it wasn't just a party. Again, it was the whole community basically saying everything we built over the winter is now being put at risk. And the seeds are in the ground, the animals are moving, and the whole year is hanging on the next 3 months of summer. Their most practical decision to signify that was lighting fire, a lot of fires. I am a research girly, so if you want to fact check me, there are medieval records and Scottish records that prove this. So most knowledge come from medieval Irish manuscripts, which is already a layer removed from the practice. But then there's also Alexander Carmichael's documented surviving Highland customs, which is one of the best primary sources on Beltane. So if you want to look more into that, those are highly suggested. And also, in Edinburgh, in Great Britain, the city of Edinburgh, they revived this fire festival in 1988. And they still do this Beltane Fire Festival to this day. If you want to fact check me, that's where you can go. Look at pictures of it. So my question was, did just the Celts do this? Because I like to look at other cultures too and see what they were doing during this time. See how they were celebrating the coming of summer. So this is where it gets interesting because the Celts weren't alone in this. Across Europe and beyond, cultures that had no contact with each other, so they couldn't have known what other cultures were doing, had basically the same answer to the same question, which is, what do you do when spring peaks? You light a fire. You gather the community, and apparently you do something slightly chaotic that then the church later has to deal with and potentially will ban and turn it into one of their own holidays. So the Romans did this, and it was the Roman Florilia Festival, and it ran April 28th through May 3rd. And it was basically in honor of the deity Flora, who is as you guessed it, the goddess of flowers. But this started happening around 240 BC. And this included tons of theatrical performances, mimes, circus acts. They even included strip shows, which some even say that's where the shows and strip clubs came from, was the Romans. It was a festival of stripping and performing and dressing up in bright colors versus the traditional white toga. And it was a good visual break from the everyday life. It was like this huge party. And it was all to celebrate the goddess of flowers, Flora. And so not only did she govern everything that blooms, she also governed like graining flowers. So this made her agriculturally critical and not just like decorative, let's put a bouquet together. So they believe that if you celebrate her, then your crops and your flowers and everything that you planted in spring will flourish during the summer. So in the medieval period, they actually believed that witches would fly over Brocken Mountain to dance for the coming of summer. And it almost certainly demonized the folk practices. Everybody freaked out when this like rumor came out that witches were up on this mountain like dancing before the start of summer. In Germany, bonfires were not lit for I guess they were lit for protection, but they were not lit for purification. They were lit solely to ward off witches, which is ironic since fire was probably the original point of the festival, as it was in other cultures. So it's still celebrated today. It's a huge thing in Germany and Scandinavia. Sweden's Valborg also involves bonfires and choral singing, and Finland's Vappu, I don't know, Vappu is one of the biggest holidays of the year in Sweden, apparently. So, all these festivals are happening around the world with no prior knowledge to other cultures celebrating, and they all revolve around the beginning of summer and fire, which I think is really cool. And then the church came in and named a saint after this festival and told everybody it was the night that witches came, and in response, people still lit bonfires. I don't know. I think we know who won that argument. During Slavic Cupola night, they would light bonfires and then jump over them, and the higher you jumped, the better luck you had for that year. But also, they had this thing called the fern flower, which if you find the fern flower on Cupola night, then it basically will grant you supernatural gifts and will reveal hidden treasures. But it was considered like genuinely dangerous. Like, you can't just go out in the forest and try to find the fern flower. It was basically like a fantasy side quest that could potentially kill you. We all know how that story goes, and it's currently growing in popularity across Slavic nations, especially in Ukraine, where it carries national identity and weight. So what connects all four of these festivals and all these festivals in general? All are in late April, June window, and they all center around fire as purification, protectiveness, and celebration, basically. And all of them were targeted by the church, suppressed, renamed, or reframed, and now they all have modern revivals, and they all involve the boundary between the worlds, the veil thinning, basically. And the deeper you look, the more these stop feeling like separate festivals, and they start feeling like religious dialects of the same ancient conversation with the turning of the year, with the beginning of summer. Let me pour a little bit more before we get into like how actually old is this holiday. So Beltane, we don't actually know. That's the honest truth. Direct evidence of ritual fire goes back like tens and thousands of years. We know that. But separating the ritual from the practical fire is genuinely hard. Like we don't have the stuff for that. But seasonal fire rituals specifically, we get evidence of that. It gets clear around the Neolithic time, which is roughly, I don't know, 10,000 to 3,000 BC. And then there's Stonehenge and other megalithic sites which are deliberately aligned with the solstices. So it proves that there was seasonal awareness at an enormous scale, and that started at least 5,000 years ago. So this maps directly back to the symbolism of Beltane's bonfires as a conduit between the human and otherworldly realms. Scholars like Calvert Watkins wrote about this, and they noticed the shared fire deities. It's the very first fire festival around this time of year, and it probably wasn't invented by just one culture. It seems that it has emerged independently in multiple places. Nature noticed the same thing, that late spring, early summer demands a response, and their most practical and logical thing was fire. The humans made literally the sun on the ground, and it was the most natural form of celebration. So I think it's really cool that it isn't like one person that invented Beltane. It's so many cultures separately and together that arrived at the same decision or answer, basically. Okay, so we've established that humans across history have been lighting fires in late spring, early summer for a very long time. But why fire? Why not just like have a party and drums and strip shows and flowers and like maybe a really enthusiastic group hug? I don't know. Like, what is it about fire that was so important? So let me explain it to you from, the view of an alchemist, which I'm not an alchemist, but I'm just saying most alchemists will view it this way. So fire is basically transformation, and it's the primary agent of transformation. So it changes the fundamental nature of whatever it touches or like whatever it's being burned. So there's like calcination, which is burning something down to reveal pure essence. And we think about fire that it destroys and is destructive, but in alchemy, fire doesn't destroy, it refines. So the world just isn't just warming up. It's fundamentally changing form. We had winter, which we were supposed to be in hermit mode, and then we had spring where we're planting new roots, and now we're warming up, and this is like peak season. This is where everything grows. In the metaphysical, there's the three metaphysical fires. So there's physical fire, which is like literal flame. And then there's the solar fire, which is the sun's energy, which brings life to all things on earth, basically. And then there's the sacred fire, which is, I think it's the stomach chakra. I know just fire is like your stomach, and I don't know. I'll have to look into chakras in another episode. But it's basically the spark of consciousness or the spirit within. Then there's fire as liminal space, which in shamanic traditions, fire is already in between worlds. It's not fully a solid, it's not a liquid, it's not a gas. It's all three. It's its own element. But looking into flames, like if you like candle magic, again, another episode for another time. But looking into a flame or like trying to make pictures out of the smoke is one of the oldest forms of divination. So this is why fire sits naturally at the center of festivals when the boundary between worlds is super thin. And it's because it's already halfway there. Then there's fire as a fundamental reality. Greek philosopher in 500 BC proposed that fire is the fundamental substance of reality, meaning it's constantly changing and constantly in flux. There's the quote, "You can't step in the same river twice," which applies equally to a flame. Okay, we know all about fire, but why specifically at the beginning of summer? My thought is, after a long winter of conserving fire, to light a massive fire during winter is seen as unresourceful, or I can't think of the word, but it's seen like you try to conserve fire to keep yourself warm during the winter. So having a massive bonfire at the beginning of summer when everything is warming up is like an act of confidence. It's saying, hey, we made it. Also, the fire mirrors the sun, fire, sun, solar. That's as simple as I can put it. Fire equals the sun. And they're celebrating the sun at its peak in summer. All right. Beltane is on May 1st. Cool. So now let's talk about the moon because, again, May 1st just isn't Beltane. It's also a full moon in Scorpio. And this is like the universe scheduling the spookiest full moon of the year on the same day as like a party holiday with fire. Like nobody asked for this. And yet here we are. So here's the basics. The full moon peaks at 11 degrees Scorpio on May 1st at 1:23 p.m. EDT. The sun is in Taurus, which is interesting because it's directly opposite of the moon in Scorpio. Which, fun fact, I'm a Scorpio and my sister's a Taurus. We're like two complete opposites, and I tell people that all the time. But anyway, so May 2026 actually has two full moons. So this upcoming full moon on Friday, May 1st, is the Scorpio full moon. And then there's the blue moon, which is in Sagittarius on May 31st. So having two full moons in the same month is like a huge signal for this is the season of release, contemplation, and wrapping up those loose ends. So how does this relate to Beltane? So on the surface, Sand is fire, fertility, celebration, and then we have Scorpio, which is death, darkness, transformation, hermit mode. But the tension there is the point. So Taurus in Beltane season, that equals stability, persistence, the tangible, where Scorpio equals death, rebirth, cycle, and what's hidden beneath. So together, they activate the axis of like what's mine versus what we share, or what's the form versus what's the transformation, or what's the comfort versus the necessity. So everybody comes at Scorpios, but Scorpios, they're the detectives, the sorcerers, the psychologists, and they're dissatisfied with the superficial. So when a full moon is in Scorpio, all truths surface, secrets are unveiled. So again, this ties directly into the Beltane festival because it's the tradition of like burning the old ways. They're both, so Beltane and the full moon in Scorpio are saying the same thing, just in different languages. So let's talk about veil thinning. Like Scorpio full moon is traditionally said to be the one full moon of the year where the veil is the thinnest. So full moons already thin the veil on their own, but the Scorpio full moon has deep intuitive insight. And then on top of that, we have Beltane, which is already one of the two greatest veil thinning moments in the Celtic year. May 1st, a double veil thinning, two separate traditions pointing the same liminal moment. Again, we did not ask for this, but be prepared. So I'm just saying, like, if you believe in this stuff, it feels like the universe is just like clearing its throat. Like, let's get rid of some stuff. And then on the other hand, if you don't believe in this stuff and you've made it this far, so obviously you're curious, it's at minimum a very elegant coincidence, which is worth noting in your journal. And then we have some other astrological events. Venus is in Gemini, which trines Pluto in Aquarius. So this is softening the intensity, opening the doors for honest conversation. Then we have Pluto over here squaring both the sun and moon. So there's pressure around power, control, and truth. And then the lunation completes a full cycle by the Aries new moon in mid-April, which we already had. So whatever you planted in mid-April, the Scorpio full moon is now asking, okay, so what actually happened? You planned something, now what actually happened? So here's my honest hot take on all of this. Ancient Beltane was never just about like a party, bonfire, flowers, and dancing. It was about driving your cattle through the fire smoke because you genuinely thought if you didn't do that, that livestock and plants would not survive the summer, which is crazy, but it makes sense. And then the Scorpio full moon energy is that same honest acknowledgement, just in a different language. So the real celebration has always required looking clearly at what you're up against. So May 1st, 2026 is basically the cosmos saying you need to pay attention and you need to get rid of whatever you had in the past. I need a little more wine. You've heard about ancient cattle and you've heard about me talking about purification rituals and European fire cults and the astrological pressure of a Scorpio moon. And you might be wondering, okay, great. Thanks for the information, but like, now what do I do about it? So here's some things you can actually do to celebrate. And I think if you've made it this far in the episode, obviously, fire, if you can, backyard bonfire, fire pit, cluster of candles. Like, the element of fire is the whole entire point. Maybe cook over an open stove. One thing that's really big in witchcraft and spirituality is writing something down you want to release and then burning it. So that could be old habits, fears, what you're done carrying. So like, I want to quit smoking, burn that shit. I want to stop texting my ex, burn that. That's how, that's one way to celebrate. Then there's also Scorpio full moon rituals if that fit the Beltane energy. So obviously journaling. So whatever, write down what you had planned in mid-April and then what actually grew and then what needs to be released. So, everything doesn't go according as planned. So assess what you had planned, reassess right now. It's kind of like a goal. It's kind of like a mid or a quarterly review, if you would say. So like, I made goals. What goals did I hit? And what goals do I need to reassess and let go of? This would also be a good time to have an honest conversation that you've been avoiding because of the Venus-Pluto energy. That supports that too. If you feel like someone isn't being a friend or there's like unspoken beef between two of you, or you want to talk about something like a career change with your spouse or something, like any honest conversation, any serious conversation that you've been avoiding, I would definitely recommend having on Friday, May 1st, but I am not responsible for any separations or divorces. A simple walk at dusk or after dark on May 1st and noticing the plants and just being really in tune with nature is a ritual in itself. An evening walk on May 1st, you might notice things that you don't normally notice in nature. So that's the simplest way you can celebrate Beltane. Beltane is all about saying yes to life. You don't need like all these elaborate ritual tools or specific candles or anything. Basically, you just need to go outside and touch grass and pay attention to what's growing. And that's the whole thing, really. So I'm thinking like all these festivals, these are all separated by centuries and geography and language and theology, and with no prior knowledge to other cultures, they all said the same thing in late spring. When the sun is warming up and life is visibly coming back to life or surging, that demands a response, and that response is fire and community. And a little bit of chaos that, the church tried to stop, but we still celebrate Beltane today in some countries. And then with the Scorpio full moon being on the same day is asking the same question that these festivals always ask. What are you celebrating from? What needed to end and what is this new thing that's beginning? So not to be dark about it, to be honest, but something needs to end. So go light something on fire responsibly, and if someone asks what you're doing, tell them that you're practicing a 4,000 year human tradition of saying yes to summer because that's what you're doing. So that's all I have on the subject. I am going to be talking more about metaphysical and conspiracies in this season. So leave a comment, like, follow, share. You know the drill. If you like this episode, let me know, and we will catch you next week. Bye.